If you are interested in Anderson's earlier career, from his short films to Punch Drunk Love, you can check out my previous video on Paul Thomas Anderson linked below and in the top right corner. I also go into much more depth into how he shoots his scenes generally, whereas this video will be more specific to the film. Today, I'll be talking about his later career so far, including There Will Be Blood, The Master, Inherent Vice and Phantom Thread. I'll go over the history and development of his later films, and then break down scenes from the aforementioned movies. I'll also talk about who shot each film, and what equipment they used to achieve the look. For There Will Be Blood, Anderson adapted the screenplay from the book Oil, but later changed the title as he didn't feel as though he took enough from the book for it to feel like a proper adaptation. He wrote the screenplay with Daniel Day-Lewis in mind, who took on the job after only being asked once and given an incomplete script. The Master was the first film that Anderson made without Robert Elswit serving as his cinematographer. Instead, Mihai Mălaimare Jr. stepped up and shot the film. 85% of the film was shot in 65mm, even though they had only planned to use it for portraits, which would have only constituted 20% of the film. This was also the first fiction film to use 65mm since Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet in 1996. The film ended up being nominated for 3 Academy Awards, with the Best Performance by an Actor in a Leading Role for Joaquin Phoenix, and in a Best Performance for a Supporting Role for both Philip Seymour Hoffman and Amy Adams. With Inherent Vice, Elswit and Anderson were back together with principal photography beginning in May 2013 after working on the script since 2010. The film was originally supposed to start shooting in the fall of 2011 with Robert Downey Jr. in the leading role, but he had to drop out. It was in 2013 when Joaquin Phoenix was in talks for the lead and Downey Jr. had passed on the role. They shot the film in California from the San Fernando Valley to Malibu. Daniel Day-Lewis paired back up with Anderson for the 2017 film Phantom Thread, a film with no official cinematographer. Michael Borman, who had previously worked with Elswit and Anderson as their gaffer, was credited as the lighting cameraman for the project. One of the first things that Anderson said was that this cannot look like The Crown, saying how it looked beautiful but super clean, and was clear that his film couldn't look like that. Robert Elswit won the Oscar for Best Cinematography on There Will Be Blood, as well as countless other nominations and wins. Both him and Paul Thomas Anderson are fans of shooting on film, and Elswit has been quoted to say that digital offers no texture and no grain. Anderson insisted on using real fire throughout the film, including the reverse shots of the characters. However, they did have to artificially light the interior scenes. Possibly the most famous scene in the film, best known as the I Drink Your Milkshake scene, shows us the power dynamic between the two characters through cinematography and blocking. The first being the low angle that we have on plain view, showing us that he is the most powerful thing in the room. We also have the physical aspect where Daniel is looking down on Eli throughout the speech. The lighting in the scene is very natural and less stylized, unlike some of the other tense moments throughout the film. The Master is an interesting film in the fact that it was the first time Anderson was working with a new director of photography, and it also being the first time that he was shooting on 65mm. There were several big grip rigs on the project, with one being a 400-foot long dolly shot where we see Quell walking along the harbour as he sees Dodd's yacht. They would switch between cameras as a way to heighten dramatic tension, an example being the scene in which Dodd and Quell are arrested outside Sullivan's home. They were able to switch between 65mm and 35mm in the scene due to the fact that they were using sized Jana glass. There are many famous shots in the film, but more notably is the scene in which Freddy does a mental exercise with Lancaster. We are kept close on the characters' faces throughout the entire scene, as well as being kept over the shoulder. This creates tension in the scene by keeping the audience's eyes on the characters, with nowhere else to go. Later on, there is an almost 2-minute long take on Freddy, only adding to the already tense feel to the scene. The lighting is very natural and motivated, but direct and representative of what the characters are feeling. Back working with Robert Elswit and on 35mm, Anderson made Inherent Vice, giving LA a vibrant yet murky feel. They used vintage equipment, mainly lenses, but they did find some old 35mm stock in people's attics. There are several famous shots from the film, but the one in which is reminiscent of the Last Supper painting by Leonardo da Vinci is probably the most memorable. Colour is used a lot throughout this film, with several scenes having a complete overcast of a single colour. For example, the use of blue here, where Phoenix is looking out of the window through binoculars. We also see this just before him and Wilson enter the house. Blue is often representative of faith and spirituality, which both play parts in the film and these scenes. Moving on to Phantom Thread, where we have a very different film. Whilst still a period piece, it is now set in 50s London, starring Daniel Day-Lewis once again. As Anderson likes to stay away from modern film technology, he and his lighting cameraman spent a lot of time testing different lights and how they react to film stock. They did a number of music videos, as well as numerous other tests over the 8-month period. They used a lot of haze in the film, which creates texture on top of the grain, as well as dirtying up the image, which Anderson wanted to achieve. There were several scenes in which the haze was quite heavy, for example, in the fashion show. There are many beautiful frames in the film, but I find the scene in which Woodcock orders breakfast to be the most interesting. Throughout the scene, they use central framing, which is often used to imply that there is tension between characters. We have the natural light shining on Reynolds through a window, with smaller practicals creating a slight kicker. We also stay static whilst he is ordering the food, with a smooth dolly back once it has arrived. It is a long take, but it manages to create even more tension between the two, ultimately ending in her giving Reynolds her name. Elswit shot There Will Be Blood on both the Panavision Panaflex Millennium XL and Panavision Panaflex Platinum. He paired them with the Panavision C and E series anamorphic lenses, their anamorphic super high speed lenses and a modified 43mm path lens. The C series lenses are known for their graduated depth of field, pronounced anamorphic flare and flattering bokeh. They also have a very organic feeling to them, which is why Anderson and a lot of cinematographers prefer them over modern day glass. The E series are often the A set of lenses for many cinematographers, as they produce overall sharpness that doesn't look too clinical. Their specialty anamorphic lenses provide additional creative options to cinematographers, as they are available as telephoto lenses for up to 2000mm. The path lens was only used for 6 to 8 shots, most famously the scene of plain view on the train with Baby HW. It has a very low contrast and tends to vignette optically, as well as being rather soft. They shot the film on Kodak's Vision 2 200T and 50D. 200T offers excellent skin tone reproduction, incredible shadow and highlight detail, as well as very fine grain, whilst 50D offers finer grain, providing the sharpest image. For the master, they opted to use 65mm, as well as select scenes in 35, using Panavision's Panaflex System 65 Studio, which is a larger but silent camera, the Panavision Panaflex 65mm HR spinning mirror reflex, which is a smaller and lighter camera, and the Panavision Panaflex Millennium XL2 for the select 35mm scenes. They used the Panavision Ultra Speed Z Series Mark II, as well as the Zeiss Jana lenses, both being rehoused vintage glass, with the Janas being from the 60s and part of Mihai's personal collection, whilst the Z Series is from the 80s. They used Kodak's Vision 2 50D, Vision 3 50D, 250D, 200T and 500T. Vision 350D is best known for its expanded dynamic range, which allows for more control in the extremes of exposure. 250D has improved grain with outstanding skin tones and colour reproduction, whilst 200 and 500T allow for more flexibility in post. Inherent Vice used the Panavision Panaflex Millennium XL2 paired with Cooke's Speed Pancros and Panavision's Super Speed lenses. Pancros offer generous flaring and forgiving sharpness, whilst also giving a soft vintage feeling to the film. The super speeds that were built in the mid-70s provide higher performance and fast aperture. Using these lenses gave the film a very vintage feel, which is what Anderson was hoping for. As for the film stock, they used Kodak's Vision 3 200T and 500T. For Phantom Thread, they used the Panavision Panaflex Millennium XL2, paired with the Panavision Ultra Speed Z Series Mark II lenses. They did a number of tests when choosing what film stock to use, and they ended up with Kodak's Vision 3 200T and 500T. As they wanted to dirty up the image, they slightly underexposed the film, and then pushed it when developing, making the stock become more sensitive. Anderson is very knowledgeable when it comes to the technical side of filmmaking. He knows a lot about the glass and how it reacts to film. He also used some of his favourite lenses, such as a 40mm and what he likes to call it, Gordon Willis lens, as well as the 43mm antique path lens that he used on There Will Be Blood, but had it converted to spherical to use on Phantom Thread. I hope you enjoyed part 2 of how Paul Thomas Anderson shoots a scene. If you haven't seen part 1, I'll put it in the description. And if you have any recommendations of directors that you would like to see me break down, leave a comment down below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
I'm finished.